The afternoon sunlight poured gently over the backyard, painting the wooden fence in warm golden hues. I'd come over to my friend's house for a casual barbecue, expecting nothing more than the usual chatter, laughter, and the smell of grilled meat. But then she appeared, my friend's mom. I wasn't sure what I had expected. Maybe a polite, slightly distant woman who exchanged a few words and disappeared. What I encountered was entirely different. She moved with an effortless grace, her presence commanding attention without demanding it. Her hair caught the sunlight in streaks of chestnut and gold, falling loosely over her shoulders. She smiled as she greeted me, the kind of smile that felt both welcoming and quietly knowing, as if she could see a part of me no one else did. My chest tightened slightly, not with embarrassment, exactly, but with a strange flutter that I couldn't name. As we talked, I noticed the little things that made her magnetic. The way she lightly brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, her eyes lingering just a second too long when she looked at me, the soft tilt of her head that made her seem curious, attentive, alive. There was a warmth in her voice that drew me in, easy and natural, but threaded with an unspoken depth. I caught myself overthinking the casual joke she made, trying to match the rhythm of her laughter, which seemed to linger in the air even after the sound faded. Even the scent of her, a faint mix of vanilla and sun-warmed skin, seemed to anchor me to the moment. I found myself watching the subtle movements of her hands, the way she gestured when she laughed, how her fingers brushed the rim of her glass. Every detail was small, ordinary, yet somehow hypnotic. I wanted to look away, to remind myself that she was my friend's mother, that I was young, that this was inappropriate. But the more I tried, the more aware I became of the quiet pull between us. There was an effortless confidence in her that contrasted sharply with my own nervous energy. I noticed how other people at the barbecue seemed drawn to her too, but she didn't need to dominate attention, it simply followed her naturally. And when she glanced my way, just for a fraction of a second, I felt it in my chest, a mixture of admiration, curiosity, and something that felt like recognition. I reminded myself constantly that I was seeing only the surface, the woman everyone admired. But even in our brief conversation, I sensed subtle layers, the hint of vulnerability beneath her calm exterior, the way her laughter sometimes softened as if she carried stories no one had asked about yet. I had no idea what this meant, or whether I should even acknowledge the fluttering feeling inside me. Yet, in that backyard, surrounded by the familiar scents and noises of summer, I realized something simple but impossible to ignore. Meeting her had shifted something in me. By the time I left that afternoon, the memory of her smile, warm, teasing, and impossibly knowing, stayed with me. It wasn't just a glance or a moment. It was the beginning of a quiet, slow-burning tension I didn't yet understand, but would soon realize I couldn't escape. The evening had settled in with a soft golden haze, and most of the guests were lingering around the grill or sprawled lazily on the porch swing. I had wandered into the kitchen to grab a drink, hoping for a moment of calm, and found her there. She was leaning against the counter, a faint smile tugging at her lips, arms crossed loosely, radiating a confidence that made the air between us feel electric without a word being spoken. "Careful with that," she said, her voice light, teasing. "I hear you have a habit of spilling things when you're nervous." I laughed, my ears warming. There was no judgment in her tone, only a playful sharpness that made me acutely aware of how young and inexperienced I must seem to her. But beneath the teasing, there was a hint of something else, a challenge, a quiet invitation to meet her wit, her depth, on equal footing. As I handed her a glass of lemonade, our fingers brushed for a fraction of a second. The touch was fleeting, accidental perhaps, but it sent a jolt through my chest. I forced my eyes back to hers, trying to appear casual, but I noticed her gaze linger just a moment too long. It wasn't flirtation in the crude sense. It was subtle, quiet, and deliberate, like she was testing me, gauging if I could hold up under a glance that seemed to say more than words could. She leaned slightly toward me, resting her forearm on the counter near mine. The warmth of her presence was immediate. The room smelled faintly of citrus from the lemonade and something else I couldn't name, soft, powdery, comforting. I felt a strange mix of excitement and hesitation, like standing on the edge of something thrilling but uncertain. "You're young," she continued, her tone light but pointed. "Do you even understand the kinds of complications you're inviting yourself into?" I swallowed, aware of my own heartbeat in my ears. "I think I can handle it," I replied, trying to match her teasing tone, though my voice was slightly more hesitant than I intended. Her laugh was soft, musical, brushing against my senses like a warm wind. "Oh, really?" she said, raising an eyebrow. "I've heard that before, and it rarely ends well." She leaned a fraction closer, just enough that I could see the glint of amusement in her eyes, the subtle curve of her lips, the faint crease of her smile that made her seem both teasing and impossibly intimate at the same time. The conversation was light, casual, but beneath every word, glance, and pause, there was tension. Each small movement, the way she sipped her drink, the tilt of her head, the brush of her hand against the counter, became a language of its own. I noticed it all, consciously and unconsciously, and felt an unspoken pull to rise to her challenge, to see if I could navigate the subtle dance she was inviting me into. When I finally left the kitchen, heart racing and mind spinning, I realized the evening had shifted. It wasn't just a playful conversation. It was the first step in a quiet game, a slow, tantalizing tension that neither of us had named, but both of us felt. And somehow, in that soft kitchen light, I knew I wanted to continue playing. A few days later, I found myself back at her house, ostensibly to help my friend with some errands. But somehow, I ended up spending more time with her than with anyone else. It started with simple things, handing her a tray of freshly baked cookies, brushing a speck of flour from her sleeve, ordinary actions, but charged with an unspoken energy that made my heart beat faster. We sat in the living room, the soft hum of a ceiling fan above and muted laughter drifting in from the kitchen. The light filtered through the curtains, casting patterns across the wooden floor. I noticed how her eyes caught the sunlight, glinting with warmth and curiosity. Every glance felt deliberate, yet effortless, and I realized I was studying her as much as she was watching me. At one point, she reached to pick up a glass of water, and our fingers brushed. Just a fleeting touch, almost accidental, but my chest tightened, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. I became acutely aware of the warmth of her hand, the softness of her skin, and the subtle way she withdrew gracefully, leaving me lingering on the memory of contact. There was something grounding in her presence, yet it sent sparks through me I couldn't explain. We started talking quietly, voices low, leaning in closer than necessary to hear each other over the faint music playing from another room. Her laughter came easily, light and melodic, filling the space around us, yet when she glanced my way, there was an extra layer, a quiet acknowledgement, a subtle challenge hidden behind her calm exterior. I caught myself smiling back before thinking, captivated not just by her words but by the energy she radiated. She made a point of noticing the small details about me, my hesitation before answering, the way I tucked my hands under my thighs when nervous. And in turn, I noticed hers, the curve of her lips when amused, the soft lift of her eyebrows when intrigued, the gentle way she adjusted her hair behind her ear, revealing the delicate line of her jaw. Every movement, small and natural, felt intimate in a way that words could not capture. At one point, she leaned slightly closer to point something out in a book I had picked up, and I could feel the quiet steadiness of her heartbeat through the subtle shift in proximity. I wanted to linger in that closeness, to feel the quiet warmth and human connection, but I also recognized the delicate tension, a line we were both navigating without words. By the end of that afternoon, I realized the nature of our interactions had shifted. It wasn't just casual politeness anymore. Each glance, touch, and shared smile carried weight, an unspoken promise of something more. I left feeling both exhilarated and unsettled, acutely aware of the slow burn that was building between us, and the quiet, irresistible pull of being near her. The small intimacies weren't just gestures, they were the beginning of a deeper connection I didn't fully understand yet, but already wanted more of. It was one of those late afternoons when the sunlight softened into a golden haze, painting everything it touched with warmth. I had gone over under the pretense of helping my friend clean up after a weekend gathering, but soon found myself alone with her in the backyard. The others were inside, voices muffled by the walls, leaving us in a quiet pocket of air that felt charged with something unspoken. She was sitting on the edge of the porch, legs crossed, her posture relaxed but precise, every gesture deliberate yet effortless. I approached, holding a tray of iced tea, and she smiled up at me, that same knowing smile that had first unsettled me. "Careful," she said lightly. "You're not used to handling responsibility yet, are you?" I chuckled, trying to appear casual, though my chest was tight with anticipation. There was a teasing undertone in her voice, and I could feel it brushing against the edges of my nerves like a quiet dare. I handed her the glass, and our fingers touched for a brief moment. The contact was fleeting, almost accidental, but it carried a warmth that lingered longer than it should. I tried to pull away, but her eyes held mine, steady and soft, as if daring me to stay. "You're curious, aren't you?" she said, leaning back slightly, her voice calm but teasing. "Curious about me. About things you haven't even imagined." There was a playful glint in her eyes, a sparkle that both challenged and comforted me. I swallowed hard, aware of how my own curiosity had been building quietly over these past few days, feeding on the smallest interactions, the smallest touches. Maybe, I admitted, voice lower than intended, catching in the warmth of the moment. I wanted to sound casual, but the truth was undeniable. My fascination with her was growing faster than I could process. Her presence had become a magnetic force, pulling me toward her in ways I hadn't anticipated. She laughed softly, a low, melodic sound that brushed against my senses and made my chest tighten. "You're too young to handle me," she said, tilting her head with a mischievous smile. "But, do you want to try anyway?" For a moment, the world seemed to slow. The sunlight caught her hair, creating a halo of warmth around her head. Her hand rested lightly on the porch railing, inches from mine, and I was painfully aware of the space between us. It wasn't just a tease, it was a challenge, a recognition of the tension that had been building quietly between us. I felt a rush of exhilaration and hesitation all at once. Her eyes softened, just a fraction, and I sensed the vulnerability she was willing to reveal, hidden beneath her usual confidence. It was intoxicating, thrilling, and terrifying all at once. I realized, in that suspended moment, that this was more than curiosity. It was an emotional connection, a pull that neither of us had fully named yet, but both of us recognized. We sat there for a while, neither speaking, simply sharing the quiet intimacy of proximity, laughter fading into soft smiles and lingering glances. It was a turning point, a moment where playful tension became something deeper, something that hinted at the slow-burning connection that was only just beginning. The evening had settled into a soft, almost magical quiet. The world outside seemed to have slowed, leaving the two of us alone on the porch, wrapped in the gentle hum of the night, crickets chirping, the distant rustle of leaves, and the occasional laugh from the house drifting faintly through the air. It was one of those moments where everything ordinary suddenly felt heightened, charged with possibility, and I felt acutely aware of her presence beside me. We sat close on the wooden swing, shoulders nearly touching. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, steady and grounding, like a hearth in the center of a cold room. She reached for her cup of tea, and our fingers brushed briefly, lightly, almost as if testing the waters. That small contact lingered in my chest far longer than it should have, sending a shiver up my spine and leaving me conscious of every subtle movement she made. The conversation drifted effortlessly from trivial matters, the neighbors, the weather, a book she had recently enjoyed, into deeper territory. She shared stories of her past with a quiet openness that was rare, the kind that made you feel honored simply to be trusted with it. I listened intently, noticing the way her eyes softened when she spoke of joys and regrets alike, and the occasional pause, almost imperceptible, that hinted at emotions she kept carefully guarded. I found myself opening up as well, nervously at first, about things I rarely admitted aloud. My fears, my small insecurities, the quiet wonder of navigating a world that often seemed too big and fast. She listened with a patience that was almost tangible, her gaze unwavering yet gentle, never rushing, never judging. There was a quiet intimacy in that shared vulnerability, a sense of connection that transcended words. At one point, a stray breeze blew, and she instinctively reached out to tuck a strand of my hair behind my ear. The touch was casual, effortless, yet my chest tightened at the warmth of her fingers lingering for just a moment longer than necessary. I noticed the steady cadence of her breathing, the subtle scent of her perfume, a soft, comforting mix of vanilla and something earthy, and it felt like the air between us had become charged with unspoken meaning. We laughed at small jokes, the kind that only felt funny in the company of someone who truly understood you. And yet, beneath the lightheartedness, there was an undeniable tension, a silent acknowledgement of the feelings that hovered just under the surface. Each glance, each brush of hands, each slight leaning closer felt deliberate and intimate, a dance of emotion that neither of us dared to name aloud. By the end of that night, I realized that our connection had shifted. The attraction, playful and teasing at first, had deepened into something more, a quiet, profound emotional closeness that felt rare and precious. I left with a sense of calm exhilaration, knowing that the spark between us was no longer fleeting curiosity, but a slow-burning bond built on trust, vulnerability, and the subtle thrill of being truly seen. Rain tapped softly against the kitchen window, a steady rhythm that seemed to match the quickening pace of my own heartbeat. Inside, the warm glow of the overhead lights and the faint aroma of coffee created a cocoon of intimacy. We were alone, the rest of the house occupied elsewhere, yet in this small space, the world felt condensed, as if it existed only for the two of us. She was standing by the counter, drying a few dishes with a practiced hand, and I couldn't stop myself from watching her. The curve of her shoulders under the soft cotton of her blouse, the gentle tilt of her head as she hummed a quiet tune, the way her hair fell in soft waves around her face, each detail seemed amplified in the dim light, hypnotic in its familiarity and its allure. "I didn't think you'd come back so soon," she said softly, glancing at me with that same teasing warmth that had first unsettled me weeks ago. "I couldn't stay away," I admitted, my voice lower than I intended, carrying a tension that made the words feel heavier than they should. She smiled, just a subtle curve of her lips, and in that moment, the air between us felt charged, delicate yet impossible to ignore. I reached for a cup on the counter, and our hands brushed lightly. The contact, though slight, sent a jolt through me, a reminder that every gesture between us now carried weight. She didn't pull away immediately. Instead, her fingers lingered a heartbeat longer, grazing mine with deliberate care. My chest tightened, my pulse rising, and I felt an intoxicating mix of excitement and hesitation. We moved closer, almost unconsciously, drawn by the gravity of unspoken feelings. Our shoulders nearly touched as we passed each other to grab ingredients for the tea, and in that small proximity, I became acutely aware of her presence, the warmth of her body, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the earthy aroma of the rain outside, the subtle rhythm of her breathing. For a long moment, we just stood there, neither speaking, caught in a delicate tension that seemed both exhilarating and terrifying. I noticed how her eyes softened, how her lips quivered with the faintest trace of a smile, how her hand rested just slightly closer than necessary to mine. Words weren't needed. The silence itself spoke volumes. Then came a laugh, soft and unsteady, breaking the tension just enough to make us both aware of it. "This is complicated," she murmured, half to herself, half to me. And yet, in the way she looked at me, not with judgment, but with curiosity and warmth, I understood that the pull between us was mutual. That night, the air felt electric, each glance and each near touch an unspoken promise of possibility. The slow burn that had been building through every shared smile, every gentle brush of hands, and every lingering look had reached a peak. We were both acutely aware of the stakes, of the boundaries, yet unable to deny the magnetic draw that pulled us closer emotionally and physically. By the time I left, the rain had softened to a gentle drizzle, but the tension lingered, a quiet, persistent hum in my chest. The moment wasn't about crossing lines or succumbing to desire. It was about acknowledging it, savoring it, and understanding that sometimes the most potent intimacy lies in the tension, in the pause before the next step. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the living room curtains, spilling warm golden patches across the floor. Everything felt quiet, gentle, as if the world itself had slowed to accommodate the delicate resolution of what had been quietly building between us. I found myself sitting on the sofa, a cup of coffee in my hands, yet I wasn't paying much attention to the drink. My focus was entirely on her, her presence, calm and grounding, yet still vibrant and full of quiet life. She entered the room carrying a small plate of pastries, the subtle fragrance of cinnamon drifting in with her. When she saw me, her face lit up with a gentle, knowing smile, the kind that made me feel seen in a way that went far beyond surface charm. She placed the plate on the table, and as she sat down beside me, our shoulders brushed lightly. The contact was casual, natural, yet my chest hummed with the warmth of it. For a long moment, we simply sat there, not speaking, sharing the comfort of quiet togetherness. There was a deep sense of intimacy in the silence, the kind that doesn't need words, only presence. I could feel the subtle rhythm of her breathing, the steady warmth of her body near mine, and the lingering fragrance that seemed to anchor me to the moment. Finally, she reached over and rested her hand lightly over mine. The touch was soft, reassuring, and deliberate. It carried no pressure, no expectation, only the quiet acknowledgement of what had grown between us. I felt my fingers tense for a moment before relaxing, letting the warmth of her hand seep into me. The gesture said more than any words could. We had crossed the unspoken boundaries of curiosity and tension and arrived at something tender, mutual, and safe. We talked then, in low, easy tones, about small, everyday things, the plans for the day, memories from the weekend, a shared joke, but beneath the ordinary conversation was an extraordinary understanding. Every glance, every pause, every half-smile reinforced what we already knew. The bond between us had deepened into something rare and meaningful. There was no rush, no urgency, only the quiet joy of being in each other's company, fully present, fully acknowledged. She leaned back slightly, her shoulder brushing mine, and I realized I was leaning in just enough to feel the gentle warmth of her body. There was no need to overthink it. It wasn't about desire or crossing lines. It was about connection, about comfort, about being close to someone whose presence felt like home. When I finally stood to leave later that morning, she gave me that same knowing smile, her fingers brushing mine briefly in farewell. The moment lingered long after I walked out the door, a quiet satisfaction humming in my chest. The slow burn that had carried us through teasing glances, playful challenges, small intimacies, and emotional confessions had reached its gentle conclusion, not in a dramatic declaration, but in the warm, unspoken acknowledgement of what we shared. I walked away with a sense of peace, exhilaration, and gratitude. Our story had built slowly, delicately, with every glance, every touch, every shared silence. And now, as the sunlight fell across the quiet street, I understood that the strongest connections aren't always rushed. Sometimes, they're savored, nurtured, and allowed to blossom naturally, leaving a warmth that lingers far longer than the briefest spark ever could.